In the 18th century, as the British East India Company started really sinking its teeth into India, one kingdom in the south fought back so hard, so cleverly, and so fiercely that it almost stopped the empire in its tracks. And this isn't a story of princes born into power. Oh no, this is the story of soldiers who took it. Today, we are diving deep into the incredible, complex story of Haider Ali and his son, Tipu Sultan, the legendary sultans of Mysore.
And you know, nothing really captures the spirit of this story better than this one quote from Tipu Sultan himself. It's all about courage, defiance, and a flat-out refusal to submit. This one idea, it's the key to understanding the man who would eventually be known as the Tiger of Mysore. All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the father, Haider Ali, and his incredible journey from a regular soldier to a king. Then, we'll see how his son Tipu took over the throne and the fight. We're going to get into their game-changing rocket technology, face their really controversial legacy head-on, and finally, witness their dramatic last stand against the British.
So our story doesn't kick off with a prince in a palace. It starts with a soldier on a battlefield. To really get a handle on the Tiger of Mysore, you've got to first understand the man who made it all possible, his father, Haider Ali. His climb from basically nowhere to absolute power is, well, it's one for the history books. The truly remarkable thing here is that Haider Ali, born around 1722, was not royalty, not even close. He didn't have a kingdom handed to him. He started out as just a horseman in the army of Mysore's ruling family, the Wojars. Sure, his dad was a commander, but they had zero claim to the throne. Haider clawed his way to the top with pure skill, ambition, and just brilliant strategy.
And wow, did he rise fast. The big turning point was in 1749. His bravery at the siege of Debanahali got him noticed by the big bosses. By 1755, he was the commander of a key fort, Dindigul. And this is so important. This is where he started working with French advisors to build a modern army and arsenal. He saw that European tech and discipline was the future of warfare. Then, by 1761, through some incredibly clever political moves, he'd pushed aside the king and his ministers and become the real, undisputed ruler of Mysore.
But see, Haider was way more than just a general. He was building a nation. He modernized his army with French help, turning it into a powerhouse. And get this, he was illiterate, couldn't read or write, but his mind was so sharp that he set up this incredibly efficient system for taxes and administration. He knew a strong kingdom needed a strong economy, so he gave farmers loans to help them grow more crops. And he was smart about religion too, making donations to Hindu temples and even putting Hindu gods on his coins.
So Haider Ali built the foundation, but it was his son who built the legend. When Haider died in 1782, right in the middle of a war with the British, the torch was passed to his son, a man who would become a global symbol of resistance, Tipu Sultan. Now, if Haider was the tough, self-made soldier, Tipu was the scholar prince, and the difference between them is just night and day. Unlike his illiterate father, Tipu was incredibly well-educated. He was fluent in several languages like Arabic, Persian, and Kannada, and he was fascinated by science and technology. His personal library was famous, filled with over 2,000 books. He wasn't just inheriting a war, he had a vision to build a modern, global state.
Let's just put them side by side. You had Haider, the uneducated but street-smart tactician, always cautious, always pragmatic. Then you had Tipu, the well-read scholar, full of ideals and sometimes maybe a bit impulsive. While Haider was happy being the power behind the throne, Tipu took it a step further. He declared himself Badshah, emperor, and started minting coins in his own name. That was a huge statement. Tipu's reign was just this whirlwind of change. He brought in a new calendar, new coins, new weights and measures, all to make things more efficient. He was obsessed with boosting Mysore's economy, especially the silk industry, to compete with the rest of the world. And his thinking was so modern. He was inspired by the French Revolution, even joined their radical Jacobin club, and planted a tree of liberty in his capital. He sent diplomats all the way to France and the Ottoman Empire, trying to build a global alliance against the British.
But you know, beyond all the politics and reforms, the sultans of Mysore are famous for one huge technological leap forward. A secret weapon that absolutely terrified their enemies and pretty much changed warfare as we know it.
So, what was this weapon? What did Haider and Tipu have that gave them a real, honest-to-goodness, technological edge over what was becoming the most powerful empire on the planet?
The answer? Rockets. But these weren't your average fireworks. The Mysorean rockets were the world's first iron-cased rockets ever successfully used in a war. Everyone else was using flimsy paper or wood. The iron casing meant you could pack in way more gunpowder, which meant way more power and a much, much longer range. This was a total game changer. The design was just brilliant in its simplicity. So you've got the iron tube stuffed with gunpowder. That's what gave it a range of over a kilometer, way farther than most cannons of the day. Then you have a long bamboo pole tied to it, which acted like a tail to keep it stable. And then, and this is the truly terrifying part, some of them had sharp sword blades attached to the front. They would come screaming out of the sky, spinning and slicing through anything and anyone in their path. And they were brutally effective. The best example is the Battle of Polilar in 1780. Mysorean rocket squads just unleashed a massive barrage, and one of them hit a British ammunition cart. The explosion was enormous, catastrophic. It led to one of the worst defeats the British ever faced in India. The British were actually so impressed that they took captured rockets back to England, studied them, and used that knowledge to create their own rockets, which they later used in other wars. Okay, so we've covered their brilliance, their innovations, their resistance. But the story of Haider Ali and Tipu Sultan is not that simple. Not at all. Their legacy is debated like crazy, even today. And to really understand them, we have to look at the darker, more controversial side of their rule. For a lot of people, Haider Ali and Tipu Sultan are straight-up heroes. They're seen as these visionary freedom fighters who saw the British threat for what it was, long before anyone else did, and who fought to the death to defend their home. For decades, they were the biggest obstacle to British colonial expansion in India. But is that the full story? Well, when you start digging into historical accounts, especially from the places they conquered, a very different story starts to take shape. And this is where things get really messy. The historical record here is pretty blunt. While they could be tolerant inside their own kingdom, their actions during war were often brutal. We have sources, including some of Tipu's own letters, that talk about destroying temples and churches in conquered areas like Malabar and Coorg. There are also many accounts of them forcing captured enemies, especially Hindus and Christians, to convert. For those communities, the story isn't about a hero. It's about a ruthless conqueror. So this complex legacy was really forged in fire, in this state of almost constant war. The fight between Mysore and the British wasn't just one battle. It was a generational struggle fought across 4 major wars that decided the fate of South India. The first war was a huge win for Haider Ali. He actually marched his army right up to the walls of Madras and made the British sign a peace treaty. The second war was more of a bloody draw, and that's when Haider died and Tipu took over. But the tide really turned in the third war. The British allied with other Indian powers and defeated Tipu. He lost half his kingdom and, this is just heartbreaking, he had to hand over 2 of his little boys as hostages. That set the stage for the final showdown. In 1799, the British surrounded Tipu's capital, Srirangapatnam. Tipu refused to surrender. He wouldn't be a puppet ruler. He chose to fight to the very end. On May 4th, when the British broke through the fortress walls, Tipu rushed right into the fight and was killed in the chaos. He lived up to his own words. He died a tiger, not a sheep. And his death marked the end of Mysore's resistance for good. So what do we take away from all this? First, their incredible rise, from common soldiers to challenging a global superpower. Second, they were military innovators who literally changed the way wars were fought with their rockets. Third, they were serious state builders, modernizing every part of their kingdom. Fourth, their 40-year struggle was the single biggest threat the British faced in India. And finally, we're left with this deeply contested legacy, where they're seen as both heroes and villains.
And that really brings us to the final question. Hero or tyrant? The story of Haider Ali and Tipu Sultan is this powerful reminder that history is never black and white. People aren't just one thing. They're complicated, they're contradictory, and they are shaped by the violent times they live in. So the real question isn't just about who they were back then, but about how we choose to remember them now. Which parts of their story do we focus on and which parts do we confront? That's the question history always leaves for us to answer.